The police watchdog is to launch an inquiry into racial discrimination in the use of stop and search by forces across England and Wales. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, that's the IOPC, will look into how stop and search powers are used by the police to examine whether there are any patterns of prejudice against ethnic minorities. The watchdog will use its powers to look into allegations of racism within stop and search, claiming it can drive real change in policing practice. The inquiry comes after the Commissioner of the Met Police, Cressida Dick, apologised to athlete Bianca Williams, who'd been stopped by police with her partner last weekend. Let's speak with Leroy Logan, former superintendent in the Met Police and former chair of the Black Police Association Charitable Trust. Leroy, afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
I feel we've had this debate 1,000 times before, haven't we, about looking into stop and search? What do you think could be new here, or is this just the IOPC reacting to current events?
I'd like to think that IOPC are realising that, the whole movement had changed from Black Lives Matters, the George Floyd issues, and the terrible, terrible footages that's been hitting social platforms for the last few weeks. They will realise it's time for them to really put a stake in the ground and say, listen, we're going to hold the police force areas across the country to account and really make sure that stop and search is used in an intelligence-based way and not a racial profiling way.
I mean, sometimes you may pull somebody over and stop them in a certain area. If you pull somebody over in Sevenoaks, for example, I know it's not the Mets turf, but you take my point, they're likely to be white. If you're in Newham or Hackney, they're likely to not be white.
Well, exactly, and that's one of the issues. When stop and search is being influenced by unconscious bias and racial profiling and other systemic failures within the organisations, then it's got to be eradicated because it's been going on for long enough. We saw improvements after the McPherson inquiry and there was independent oversight, but things have gone from bad to worse. And, I believe we're in a pre-McPherson era where stop and search and the lack of respect and dignity shown by officers in stopping members of the public from the black community is getting worse, and it's got to stop.
How can this be, Leroy? I mean, you were a former senior cop for many years, and you know that the emphasis in police training on all of these subjects, diversity. When I talk to people at the Police Federation, I go down to their conference and I talk to cops there. Most of them will tell me, anecdotal as it is, that they're scared witless to pull a black kid up these days because they know that there could be these kind of ramifications. You also know that stop and search isn't always pretty by definition. It's not meant to be a good look, and it can be uncomfortable. All of that goes with the territory. So how has it not got better? I mean, who is the police officer in Bethnal Green Station that says, I think I'll go out and nick some black kids today for a laugh?
It doesn't necessarily mean that they actually intend to do it as they leave the nick. It could be in the heat of the moment where they're pursuing someone, and as a result of that, they get, a lack of objectivity. They think, well, they're only running away from me because they must be up to no good. Oh, they wear a hoodie and they're black, and it just builds up this stereotype and assumptions. And then, when you get there and the person's playing up because they may have been stopped a few times during the week, they're going to think, well, it reinforces their presumptions, and as a result of that, you get that heavy-handed approach. And my real issue is about how they're starting to use handcuffs before they even do the search. Now, I don't know where the risk assessment came in that you've got to handcuff someone before you do a stop and search. All that is getting worse. I saw a stop and search on my road on Sunday, and it was brilliant. They did an excellent stop. It led to an arrest for drugs and a load of money being confiscated, and it was textbook. So if it can be done, and that was after a pursuit right along my road, and if it can be done in that circumstance, I don't know why it can't be done in other circumstances.
But you know as well as I do, Leroy, in fact, far better than I do, that there are some, a copper's instinct does play a part here. Are we to remove that from the equation now? I mean, I'm thinking of the two athletes the other weekend. Something clearly within the thinking of, I don't know how many cops are in the van, half a dozen maybe, would have been, look, this is a bit suspicious. This car is doing the rat run thing. We've all watched that on one of those traffic cop programs. A left, a right, a left, a right, a left, a right. I think they're giving us the run around here, and then we ask them to stop, and then they don't stop. We're in Maida Vale. It's not as posh as people think. There are problems in that neck of the woods, as you know. There could be somebody in here for weapons, drugs, whatever it is. So we're going to stop them and cuff them because they failed to stop the first time.
Yeah, but the thing is, it has to be intelligence-based. I mean, I'm not saying don't use your instincts, because, I sort of really assess things. You might have just that gut feeling and hope it's not your ulcer. But you have to make sure it's got evidence at the heart of it. And you can't go for a fishing expedition. Oh, you drove that way. Oh, you've got drugs in the vehicle. Oh, they've got a weapon. Those sort of things.
Why can't you go for a fishing expedition? On some occasions. I mean, you don't want people going out playing a game of bingo with people's lives. But, there are times, surely. If you see, I remember saying to somebody recently, if you're sitting there in your police car and you look across the street corner and it's 12 o'clock at night and there's two kids who look about 15, but the hoods are up and they're clearly, almost acting out the part of shady characters. And some kids do like to do that, black or white, as we all know. And you're going to want to ask what they're doing out, aren't you?
No, that's called stop and account. Now, you can stop and ask for someone to account why they're there, what they're up to, etc. That's different from a stop and search. So you can ask questions to follow up on that gut feeling. Doesn't fit the environment. There might be other information. Someone says, oh, there is people hanging around my house, or it's just been broken into, all these sort of things.
Sure.
That can then lead to reasonable grounds to stop and search, and then finally to arrest. So, there's nothing stopping officers from stopping an account and doing it in a reasonable way.
Okay.
It's when it just seems to be a default, put the cuffs on, then ask questions, and then search.
More and more officers, of course, are wearing body cameras. That has to be a game changer, Leroy.
Absolutely, and it has. And not only for members of the public, but for officers who get sort of vexatious litigants who complain all the time. But I think that's why the Commissioner apologised. She's had a chance to look at the body cam, and obviously seeing how much anxiety it caused to Bianca Williams, in particular, because she was holding a baby at the time, and they want to handcuff her and leave the baby in the car. And I just wondered, if it was a white woman with a 3-month-old baby, would that have happened? And these are sort of questions that people are asking, and we really need to get to the bottom of it once and for all.
In terms of the IOPC and this investigation, I mean, is it like this isn't a McPherson, but it's an investigation nonetheless? Do you welcome this?
I welcome it as long as the IOPC do what they're supposed to do. Remember, the IOPC came out with the McPherson inquiry. It's one of the recommendations, and they haven't had a good start. The first 10 years, they seemed to be too aligned to police forces. There wasn't that critical distance, especially when it came to the Duggan inquiry. So since then, they seem to have had a raft of changes within, getting rid of a lot of ex-cops doing the investigations. And as a result of that, they seem to have this critical distance. So I think this is a chance to really put a stake in the ground and say, listen,
a lot of your former colleagues fear it's gone the other way, of course, with the IOPC.
Well, they would. And to be honest, we've heard that many times before, like, oh, we don't stop youngsters from a certain racial group because we don't like the fact that they'll have their own CC cameras and everything. But I've heard this before, and I just think they just need to wise up. They're professionals. They know their rights and responsibility as police officers and the regulations and the powers. Do it properly and make sure it's intelligence-based.
Have we now got, just a final point, Leroy, have we now got a kind of skewed picture of things? Because I know that there is, among some kids, and let's remember, most kids, black or white, don't go out committing crimes, and they're not horrible toe rags, and they're not carrying a knife or a bag of Class A's. They're just going about their business. But and sometimes we talk about these subjects so often. I think if you came down from another planet, you'd think, what kind of group of people live on this Earth place? They're all up to no good. Of course, most kids aren't, but there is. I base this on just looking at social media. A lot of young black kids now are playing up more and more when they're stopped because they realise there's a narrative out there. There was an arrest film recently where the kid started shouting, "I can't breathe." I mean, there was, clearly this was BAFTA-style acting based on nothing, but clearly what had been on the news. Could that be a problem for serving police officers?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And I mean, there will be people who will take advantage of certain situations. And, officers have to be professional enough to really contain it as best as possible. Obviously, if it goes too far and they have to, apply cuffs and arrest that person, then fair enough. But, I think now is a time when policing is even more important to be connected with communities and not seen to be an occupying force, but a police service.
Good work, Leroy. It's always good to have you on, sir. Thank you. Leroy Logan, former superintendent in the Met Police, former chair of the Black Police Association Charitable Trust, with us on the programme.